life's going to hit you hard. Doesn't matter if it's sports, school, or something way bigger like losing a loved one. The question isn't if you're going to face tough times, it's what you're going to do when you face tough times. Will you stay down, or will you get back up stronger? Today we are talking about two things that separate athletes and honestly people in life from the rest: persistence and perspective. Persistence is what keeps you moving forward when everything in you wants to quit. Perspective is what lets you zoom out, see the bigger picture, and realize what feels like the end is often just a step in your story. Let's start with persistence. So, when we talk about, body aches, getting benched, potentially having just an off game where you just go 0 for 4, or you drop a bunch of catches, or whatever happens. Something happens and it disrupts you. It sucks. It's hard. But when you look at losses, you got to look at them as lessons. You got to look at, like, when something goes wrong, when something happens in a game or in practice or just in general, we've got to look at what can we learn from that? What can we take from that? Because losses are only losses if you don't learn anything from them. So one athlete example I like to give here is Hudson. So Hudson, he's gone through a lot this past year, and it's an important year for recruiting wise. It was his junior year, and it really, he had a lot of disruptions. He worked his butt off to be ready for the season, and he was persistent, and he committed to the nutrition. He got bigger, stronger, faster, and he worked his butt off. He got on the varsity. He started getting more consistent playing time, and then he got sick, like really sick for 8 weeks, pneumonia, all the things. And that could have disrupted him. That could have shut him down. And more things that we'll talk about here in a little bit is a couple months after having his season get disrupted and not be able to play the rest of the season because of the sickness, he then lost a brother. He lost somebody that he was very close to, and in a very difficult way, a way that shouldn't happen, but happens a lot more, especially since COVID, and that's suicide. There's more and more suicide. I see it in the hospital setting. I see it in all different settings. We see it, in high schools, colleges, in adults. Like, it's happening a lot. And none of us should lose somebody that young in that way. But, this really disrupted Hudson for a bit. This was something that it was really hard, not just sports wise, but also life wise in general. That is a huge, huge thing to lose. That is a huge void. So not only was he getting disrupted in his game, in his season, and whatever, but then he had this life thing happen. And a lot of people would want to quit. A lot of people would start blaming God or blaming other things, or just be so mad that they just stop trying and they stop, doing anything. But Hudson didn't just stop at that. Like, he found a way to keep going. He found a way to trust God. He found a way to trust, and lean on friends and family to get him through this. And he's not only back to playing, but he's also back to where he was at and even stronger than he was before his junior season. So he's continuing to try to improve and to get back to where he was and even better. And he actually is better than he was, again, his junior season. He's visiting colleges. He's doing all these things to keep going because life still goes on. There's still things to be done, and he continued to find a way to do that. Now, I also want to talk about, some of mine, because this is why a lot of the reason why I do what I do, why I serve you guys, high school athletes, is because of a lot of the life stuff that I've gone through. I wanna emphasize the persistence through, I will say, more recent things, I think. I mean, if you call it recent. So, losing my dad in 2018, that was a huge disruption to my life. I was in the middle of college, and it can be really difficult, and it's, lost my mom at a young age. But it's like life still goes on. There's still so much more life to live. I think a lot of people forget, when things get hard, when things happen, a lot of us, we tend to lose our perspective. We tend to lose our ability to see the bigger picture. And we'll talk about perspective in a sec, but sometimes it just requires some persistence. It just requires to keep going, and things get better. Another thing that happened was in 2023. So this was within 6 months of starting my business, serving you guys. I got scammed. I got scammed a good chunk of money. I lost all of my savings. I also went into a good amount of debt from some things, from some mistakes of people that I trusted, and just mistakes that I made. Again, thing that could have derailed me and could have had me quit my goal. But I freaking kept going because I realized that God has put me on this earth to serve you guys, to equip you guys, to help you guys succeed. And so even though stuff happened, ish happens, life lifed me up a little bit, I made some mistakes. I kept going because I was like, well, no, there's more to this. I know that I can keep going. I know there's an opportunity. And that's where persistence comes in. Even looking at, hey, I've been working at this for 3 years and I'm still not full-time business. I'm still working per diem job, 2, 3, sometimes 4 days a week, working at a hospital, doing things that are okay, but not what I'm called to do. And it requires persistence sometimes. It can be very frustrating, especially working in the hospital. There's a lot of depressing things in the hospital. But then I'm reminded every time I get on a call or every time I speak to a team or I speak to an athlete or, work with an athlete, like I'm reminded of what I'm doing. I'm reminded of why I do this. And so when we talk about persistence, one of the things that can help you be persistent, even when you get benched, even when something in life happens, even when you get injured, is you look at why you do it. Most athletes, when I talk to them, they talk about how much they love their sport for different reasons. You love your sport, you love the team aspect, you love, being around your teammates, maybe you love just being able to hit that ball or hit that player, whatever it is. Like there's something about your sport that you love, physically, smell wise, sound wise, listen, all the things. And so this is what you got to tap into. This is what, when we talk about persistence, is you have to tap into the why. Persistence isn't about like never failing. It's not about never falling. It's about refusing to stay down. And how you can refuse to stay down is to make sure that you're doing something you love, that you do something that you're passionate about, that you're, ideally gifted in, or that you've got some talent for, and you tap into why you do it. Simply just saying I love baseball is not enough. Why do you love baseball? Why do you love football? Why do you love basketball? Why do you love soccer? Like, what is the thing about that sport that you love so deeply that you're willing to sacrifice comfort? You're willing to allow yourself to go through hard times to get better. So persistence is key. However, perspective is even more important. So persistence, it's great, but it's not enough. You can keep moving and still feel lost or frustrated, if you don't have that perspective. So when I talk about losing my parents, just to give you guys some examples here, when I look at, losing my mom at a young age or losing my dad in college, it can be frustrating. When I think about, my dad was a sports guy. He loved sports. He loved talking about the Mariners, loved talking about Seahawks, all the things. He was a Seattle sports fan through and through. The fact that I don't even get to talk to him about any of this stuff sucks, But I also look at the perspective and I look at, if he was around, there would be things I would not be able to do if he was still around. There would be things that wouldn't have happened or that I wouldn't be able to do again if he was still around. On a smaller note, there's things like college, where I went to college. I would have loved to go to UW. And I know that if I would have put in the work, I had the GPA. If I would have put in the effort into the SATs, I probably would have been able to get into UW. And I didn't even try. But I also know that if I didn't go to Central Washington University, that I would never have become a dietitian. I would never have become a personal trainer. My faith walk, my journey with God would not be the same. And so I recognize that as fun as it would have been to go to UW and that energy and that culture and that lifestyle, there are so many things that would not have happened if I would have gone there instead of Central. So think about that. Think about, you going to one school over the other, or whether it be a high school or a college. Maybe you going to a certain college or a certain high school gives you a whole nother opportunity that you could never even think of. Maybe again, one of the injuries, maybe the injury is a wake up call of, oh, hey, I'm not taking care of my body well enough. So this is my wake up call to fix it. Maybe you getting benched is a sign of you not putting in the work. And this is your reminder to say, hey, no, I got to do more. I can't just focus on my training. I got to look at my nutrition, my sleep, all the other things. So really look at that like bigger picture and really make sure that, really look at like, why did this happen? Like some things you can't control. Simply put, there are things that you cannot control, but there are a lot of things where maybe that perspective shift is looking at why did that happen, and what was my role in that, how could I fix that. And it's not, a lot of those things is you can't fix it. There are things that are done and you cannot go back, but there are things that you can do to help other people. So, all this that we talk about with perspective, it's not about looking at things through rose colored glasses. Everything's perfect. Everything, sugarcoat things. There's no hard stuff, like whatever. Like, no, like I said, it's hard. Losing people is hard. Getting injured, hard. Getting benched, hard. But instead of staring at it through a magnifying glass, looking at this tiny little piece of it, only seeing the pain that's right in front of you, I've learned to step back and see it from an aerial view. I look at the bigger picture. I look at, not just this microscopic thing. I look at the bigger picture, the whole view. I can see the growth. I can see the impact. I see the way that those experiences shaped me into who I am and how I help others today. So the way that I help others today is through the hard times. It's through the losing people. It's through making the mistakes. It's through not putting in the work when it came to my training, nutrition, etc. when I was your guys' age. That is what perspective is recognizing these are the things that could look different. These are the things that how I can help others, or how I can reach those goals. Now, let's go back to the athlete, please. Can't talk. Let's go back to the athlete piece. So when we talk about injuries, being benched, losing games, getting cut, sure, it sucks, but it's not the end. Let's look at some pro athlete examples. Kobe. Kobe tore his Achilles, but he wasn't finished yet. He knew he wasn't done. People wrote him off. People were like, you're never going to come back. But he had that Mamba mentality that if you see me in a fight with a bear, pray for the bear kind of mentality. And he came back. He still had a few more seasons left in him. He still had a little, one more first team all league season in him. He still had some of that in him. Alex Smith, quarterback for the 49ers and Chiefs. Between those stints, between the 49ers and Chiefs, he had that life-threatening leg injury that required like 17 surgeries and almost losing his leg. They thought he was never going to even walk again. And he ended up coming back to the NFL, playing for Andy Reid, getting some playoff stints, having a huge comeback. So injuries suck, but what you do with them is really what matters. Tiger Woods, he also had his back injuries. He had his surgeries and whatnot. He also had his infidelities. He had his off the field kind of mistakes that he was making, or off the green mistake, whatever you want to call it. And he went a decade without a major win. That's a long freaking time to not have a major win and to keep golfing, to keep going. And what do you know? He came back and he won the Masters in 2019. He's like all-time wins. He's second for the Masters. So huge accomplishment. And he only did that because he was like, no, even though I haven't won in, major win in 10 years, even though I've had all these things happen, I'm going to keep going and figure this out. So that is perspective. That is persistence. That is resilience to keep going, even when life lifes you up, or when you make mistakes, or when something happens to you in your sport. So athletes, resilience is being able to reframe those setbacks, the injuries, the missed seasons, the tough losses, and use it as fuel. You cannot control what happens to you entirely, but you can control your perspective and your response to it. So again, these things might happen, but you can shift that perspective. I really appreciate this example. So this is actually Hudson's dad. Huge respect for him. Gonna have him on the podcast. And he lost a son, and he lost his son in a way that a lot of our society, it hits hard, like that suicide thing. It's hard, but and he struggled with that. He struggled with like, and I know others do too. Other parents who struggle when their kid commits suicide, or when they get kidnapped and they never come back. Like there are things that the parents are like, it's my fault. Like a lot of inward pointing to their mistakes, and we can do that for days. But if we just keep looking and pointing fingers and blaming ourselves and not really looking at how can we do things different, like we're just going to be stuck. We're going to be living like that, and there's going to be no changes, there's going to be, again, we're going to be narrow focused, magnifying glass, not seeing the bigger picture. What Hudson's dad's starting to see, what Bill's is starting to see, or what he has been seeing, is that his story, his family story, his son's story is a tool now. It can be something that is used to help others come to God, to help others see that our society is broken, that our kids are broken, that our men are broken, that we need to talk about things. We need to work out our issues, because these are the reasons why a lot of us struggle with depression and suicidal thoughts and all these things, is because we don't talk about things, especially as men. And so that's something that we'll unpack with him on the podcast. But like, that is something that he is seeing, that there are people, even at his son's memorial, even as they're celebrating their son and the life he had, he's still seeing people coming to God. He's still seeing hope in that. So as hard as it is, as difficult as it is, it doesn't take away from the difficultness or the challenge, but it makes it a little bit more powerful when you see what can come of it. And so when life lifts you up, when the game knocks you down, now you've got two choices. You can zoom in on the pain, or you can zoom out and see the bigger picture and keep going. So remember, persistence keeps you in the fight. Perspective shows you why the fight is even worth it. Put those together and you're going to be unshakable in sports and in life. So remember that. Remember persistence, remember perspective, hold on to that resilience, keep going, and as always, keep striving for greatness.